Welcome to Next in Tech, an S&P Global Market Intelligence podcast where the world of emerging tech lives. I'm your host, Eric Hanselman, Chief Analyst for the 451 Research arm of S&P Global Market Intelligence, and today we'll be discussing customer success with Senior Research Analyst Bruce Daly. Bruce, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be a part of it, Eric.
Well, great to have you, and what we're talking about today is something that I guess, to my mind, really is an extension of a lot of what we've been talking about around customer engagement, customer experience, and maybe driven by some of the changes that are happening in the market. And before we get too far afield, I first want to touch on really what's customer success, what's it all about, and how's it related to customer experience?
Well, let me answer that question, first of all, by talking a little bit about where customer success is. So right now, I really believe that customer success is somewhere in the collective unconsciousness of the IT industry. So you see it popping up all over the place. You see it popping up in presentations. You see it popping up in sales literature. You see it popping up actually in S1s and annual reports. And really what that indicates to me, Eric, is that the industry really hasn't settled on exactly how it defines customer success and what it is. So when you're asking that question, to some extent, we're anticipating where the market is headed. But that being said, I would say in general, what customer success is all about is providing a new kind of customer experience that really focuses more on the concerns that customers have once they purchase a product. And it's interesting that the shift in business model from on-premise perpetual-based pricing has really facilitated a change in risk. So vendors now are taking on a lot more risk than they have in the past in terms of their customers being successful in implementing their products. And consequently, that's really driving demand for this nascent new market.
Now, that's interesting. The SaaS angle is something that I think's a really fascinating part of this, because it's really that business model that's changed. I mean, the typical transaction, CRM was sufficient because the only real goal was to get the customer to buy. And then they've bought, and then there's a long period before they're going to buy again. But with subscription models, we're now in a mode in which we've got to keep people renewing. And in order to do that, they've got to be successful over and over and over and continue to be happy. That's really a pretty basic change in dynamics, yeah?
Well, that's a very insightful observation, Eric, and that's absolutely correct. But there's an additional component to it, and that is there's a financial reward that investors place on renewal revenue. So at the moment, and I know you're familiar with the M&A space, but maybe just to touch on it briefly, most companies are bought on the basis of profitability. And investors assign different weights to different types of revenue. So service revenue typically tends to be low, but subscription renewal revenue typically tends to be high. So service revenue may be anywhere around the range of 4 times EBITDA, but subscription revenue is 12 times EBITDA, and sometimes recently it's been even higher. So consequently, investors are placing more of a premium on that type of revenue. And consequently, a lot of the initiative in this market is being driven from the top down.
Oh, so fundamental motivations in terms of getting this done, because it's a metric that, in fact, investors are looking at heavily.
Yeah, and why a dollar is still a dollar from a cash flow perspective. In an exit, if you have lots and lots of renewal licenses, you could have a valuation for your company that's 3 or 4 times as big as if it was all new sales.
I mean, churn's always been a concern, but now in a subscription model, that really is the one thing that organizations are trying to hold off and hold at bay at all costs.
Well, exactly. And some of the leaders in this space have said to me, well, I started this company because I had another company. And what we found is that we had developed a leaky bucket. So we kept adding more and more revenue into the top of the bucket, but it kept leaking out the back.
And at a point at which investors are and the markets are sensitized to those kinds of numbers, that makes a real difference.
Yeah.
I guess from a broad market perspective, I mean, it sounds like this is a new market as opposed to an adjacency per se. Is that the case? What's your take?
Well, it's one of those things that people have been working extremely hard for 10 years to be an overnight success.
Well, and I guess, well, that's the question. Are they getting to the point where the market's mature enough for there to be overnight successes, or are they still going to be cranking away at it for a while?
Well, our research seems to indicate that this market is really crossing the chasm, from the historic Jeffrey Moore perspective. That so far, most of the customers, when we look at the customer base of companies like Tatango or companies like Gainsight or companies like Churn Zero, what we see is that they have, for the most part, predominantly cloud native SaaS companies. And most of those are actually coming out of the Silicon Valley. But what we're seeing is that on the other scale, or the other side of the fence, companies are hiring customer success executives without having customer success teams in place. So we think this is part of this being pushed from the top down, and that the investors and owners are saying to executive management, you need to do a better job with renewals. Renewals are saying, okay, uh, they're going out and they're hiring a customer success czar to be in charge of those efforts, and they're going out and they're actually building the teams. And so as a consequence, what we see is demand is starting to build up on the more mainstream part of the marketplace.
So that sounds kind of like that's putting the cart before the horse, or is this something that because it's an executive level imperative, that's actually a reasonable way to go about it?
Reasonable or not, I just think that's kind of the way the market is approaching it. I think it really kind of lends itself towards one of the challenges that this market faces, Eric, and that's digital transformation. And that, interestingly enough, a lot of these companies are purveyors of digital transformation. So they're selling digital transformation. But an unexpected consequence of that is that these technologies are starting to erode the organizational barriers within their own organizations. And so a lot of the opposition to customer success initiatives is not based on the maturity of the technology. It's really based on what apple carts are you upsetting internally. Because if you were going to do a full implementation of customer success, what you really would do is you'd have a small group focused on new sales and a very large group that's focused on renewals. And so, to a certain extent, what that really does is it dissolves the barriers between sales, marketing, and customer support. So obviously, those are pretty well entrenched, not only organizationally, but also in people's minds. So that is really it's the people, Eric, I think, that are really slowing down adoption of this particular technology.
Oh, as the sticker on the box says, some silo busting required, and that's. I guess we see that in so many aspects of digitization because we're starting to meld together teams that didn't actually operate together fully. As you said, normally it was sort of sales would be pitching, the client over the wall to customer support. Customer support would really only be engaging when there was a problem, as opposed to the customer success model that's really tending that customer throughout that life cycle. And I guess that seems like that changes some of the timelines of the relationships with customers. In that the organization now winds up being a lot more tied in. There's got to be that handoff from the selling process into that initial onboarding, that first experience, and yet it's also extending that relationship for a much longer time period. I mean, hopefully, I guess from a subscription perspective, hopefully forever. But that's a sequencing that I guess, as you're pointing out, most organizations aren't really structured to do. How do they cope with that?
Well, I think you bring up a really good point. It's really more about marriage than dating.
Yep.
So organizations have been great at dating. They've been great at showing up the door with flowers and being on their best behavior and taking the customers out to the nice restaurants. But then, once things reach a certain point, they tend to ghost them and they tend to disappear.
So we need to get ghosting out of the customer relationship.
That's right. I hate to bring up the C word, but yes, it really requires a greater level of commitment.
Well, that's a pretty significant transition when we start thinking about what organizations have to do. I mean, there's always, I think, been lip service paid to dedication to customers, but so much of that is typically upfront. We're going to design a product or a service or a capability that meets customer requirements. Then they're going to buy it, and then off we go. And we'll continue to kind of listen to them about what they want, about features and functionality, and those sorts of things that are going to grow the product as we go along. But it's not a direct engagement. It's not the marriage part. It's the sort of the, hey, we'll call you and maybe see you next month sort of thing. The long distance relationship, I guess, of customer interaction.
Well, you're totally right. I mean, customers say that they put their clients at the center of the relationship, that they're customer first. But how many of them also take their contact centers and outsource them halfway across the globe so that when the customer has a problem, they call them, right? A lot of this really, Eric, is about creating a customer-centric organization. And that's a big shifted mindset and has to go way beyond just paying lip service to this idea. Now, I know you've had a long career in technology, and I have too. I think throughout my career, at least in software, what I've seen is a lot more busted projects than projects that were successful. There's projects that are very, very successful, but that's definitely in the minority. Then there's a lot of projects that kind of limp along. And then there's a bunch of projects that are just complete busts. And sometimes you even see about them in the newspaper. So, what this really is going to go a long ways towards addressing, and I think that's particularly true with the onboarding space and some of the vendors who specialize in that, like Batten or Guide CX, is that they are going to address what I think has been the number one problem in software throughout my career, and that is busted implementations. So now the vendors really have an incentive to try and bring best practices to the customer, to try and help them through the digital transformation, to try that and get them to realize as much value as they possibly can out of their software, because when it comes renewal time, that's when it's really going to account.
When Cheryl Kingstone's been on, especially the last episode we did with her that was talking about digitization of customer experience and some of the customer sat pieces and customer engagement channels, she was making the point that one of the big things about digitization is that you've got to ensure that you do have much tighter integration for the various engagement channels. But that was all on the upfront side. It was the purchase, it was the delivery, but it really wasn't the ownership for the long term. Do the kinds of things that one would be doing, for organizations that were doing the first stages of that digitization journey, the fact that they can integrate, they can blend channels, all of the customer engagement pieces, whether or not that happens to be web, email, text, phone, call center, all the various bits and pieces. Is the knitting together of that a good entree to this, or is this really a journey that's got to do substantially more to realize real benefit on the customer success side?
Well, in my opinion, it's even more leverageable. All of that integration that Cheryl was describing is even more legible in this particular space, because customers know a lot more about their customers than they do about prospects. And consequently, they're gathering a lot more information like usage of the product. They're gathering information from sources like S&P about what changes are taking place in the organization from a personnel perspective or a financing perspective. And so consequently, what you're seeing is that in addition to having all those channels to engage a client, what companies are doing, and really at the heart of customer success, is the idea of monitoring customer health. So what they're doing is they're keeping track of a number of metrics, and they're sort of seeing who is struggling, who's having problems with this implementation, who stopped using the software, who is not really getting as much value out of the product as they could, and they're proactively reaching out to customers, not in a direct sales situation, but reaching out to them to help them get more value from their products. And so all of these channels just facilitate that process. But at the heart of it is really this idea that we have to be concerned about our customers after the sale.
And that's a big step for many. Well, and it sounds like, so you were talking about some of the perspectives that you've been working on in your research. What are you touching on, and what are those things? I mean, what should our clients be looking for in terms of getting a better understanding about where we are with customer success, where it fits in the market, and where they should be headed?
Well, we've been trying to look at this market through a number of different lens, Eric. So one of the ways we've looked at it is, as you know, we've got a number of customer surveys, and we've been asking some very specific questions about customer success to try and take the temperature of the market. Now, in addition to that sort of looking backwards, we've also been looking forwards by doing market sizings. So we've have gone out, talked to all the vendors, made estimates about what we think their revenue is, check that with them, and then use that to make projections about where we think the market is headed. In addition, we've also taken the time to go out and actually interview one-on-one a large number of the players in this specific marketplace. And as a consequence, I think we've got a pretty well-rounded look at the market, which is part of the reason that I think we're really number one in customer success among analyst firms.
Oh, wow. Hey, well, a good place to be, especially in a transition for something that is as fundamental to the way in which we're typically looking at that next stage of engagement. I mean, everybody's looking towards that shift towards subscription models. And as you pointed out, there's a lot of valuation from the markets and investors about making subscription models work. Everybody wants to go there. When we were Mark Fontecchio was on talking about how the automotive industry is trying to turn itself into a subscription model, and some of the challenges that exist there. But really, organizations have got to get the fundamentals right in order to master it.
Absolutely. And you know what? You're going to be glad to know, Eric, that we're eating our own dog food.
Our champagne, please. I don't know. I'm not looking at that plate and now the glass, that I'll drink that, but
not a dog guy, I take it. Well, in any event.
Well, I am a dog guy. That's why I don't eat the dog food.
Well, in any event, as sort of a sanity check to all the other research we're doing, we've been reaching out within S&P Global, which, as you know, is an enormous company. And we have found a number of people who have customer success in their title. So we're working with them to really understand where the market is based on their journey and the journey of other customer success practitioners. So we're spending a lot of time talking to customers so that we're not, in fact, drinking the vendor champagne.
Well, hopefully that's a good place to go and move us forward. So what should organizations be considering? What are the first steps that they need to be looking at in order to really get to a better footing around customer success? I mean, beyond reading the research, what kind of pieces is this part of a natural flow in the digitization journey? What are the steps?
I think it really starts at the top of the organization, and that you need an executive who is willing to make a commitment to transforming the organization and putting this customer exactly at the center of the organization. And that is going to be a difficult task, Eric. It's going to involve changing people's responsibilities. It's going to involve really changing the way that companies fundamentally look at customers. It's going to involve cultural changes. And so consequently, I think that for CEOs to educate themselves about what exactly does this mean and to talk to their peers and try and understand, well, what are the most successful practices that people are engaging in? Because another aspect of our research is we obviously look at tech leaders versus tech laggards. We look at digital transformation leaders versus digital transformation laggards, and those are two different groups, incidentally. And what we're seeing is that the companies that are both digital transformation leaders and tech leaders are enjoying a lot more benefits from customer success than companies that lag in either of those two areas.
It's worth the investment to get to that stage where you got the digitization, the digital capabilities to be able to move this forward, to give you the agility to be able to fire on this, and hopefully to do the silo busting that you're identifying before.
Now, no one can predict the future, obviously, Eric, right? But I think from an investor's perspective, this is a very attractive marketplace. And in fact, at least within my coverage area, there's one area of it specifically onboarding that we think is going to grow faster than any other part of the software business.
Oh, interesting. And that basically front end capability. I mean, is that one of those things that can be carved out without upsetting the apple cart too much? Or maybe shifting the apple cart a little bit without knocking any apples off?
Bingo. That's exactly why onboarding, it seems to us, has already crossed the chasm and in fact appeals to mainstream businesses as well as to cloud native SaaS businesses, because you don't really need to reinvent your sales and marketing organization. You can just concentrate on getting customers to adopt your product. So that's politically pretty neutral. But at the same time, that's completely dependent on new customers, right? And that's really a fundamental difference between the larger customer success market and the onboarding market. So what feeds the onboarding market is new customers, but what sustains the larger customer success market is existing customers.
Oh, yeah, good point. If you don't have that steady stream of new customers, onboarding is going to eventually fade a little bit. And yet you still got to maintain those customers. You've got the core piece of customer success.
Yeah, but I think the companies really need to look at that not so much as maintaining, but really more as an opportunity, because it gives them a chance to cross-sell and upsell into their existing install base. And there's a number of advantages to that. First of all, you're dealing with people that already know you, so you don't have to go through that first date sort of stage of the sales process. Second, the other advantage to it is that unlike new sales, existing sales occur on a regular basis, at least in a subscription model. So you know exactly when you can expect the revenue from people. And so there isn't as much discounting, there isn't as much uncertainty in the pipeline. And that's part of the reason, Eric, frankly, that investors prefer this type of revenue to other types of revenue.
Yeah, lower cost of sale. Oh, yeah, good things. Huh?
And more predictability, more dependability, so that they could turn around and in their financial projections represent them more accurately to their masters.
And again, one of those things that digitization gives us, because we've got the visibility, we're accumulating the data. Now we can understand what that direction looks like, and we can do prediction, as you were saying, and have greater reliability in the overall operations of the business. Yeah. Living the dream.
Living the dream. But beyond that, what I find really interesting is the unpredictability of it. Now, to some extent, the customer success market is an unintended consequence. It's a black swan. It isn't something that anyone really planned or anyone anticipated or anyone expected. It is a situation that's come up that really is a profound driver of change. And yet it's something that no one really intended.
Ah, the byproduct of that shift towards subscription, but in that shift, well, it's like in a lot of shifts in tech, we don't really know what all the follow-on pieces are that are going to be caused by that change.
Yeah, and that's one of the beauties of this job, is that I get to see the forest while everyone has their face planted close to the tree.
Well, this is fascinating stuff, and especially in shifting markets, a lot of things that we're looking at. But we are at time. Bruce, thank you very much for all of these insights. I hope our listeners will check out a lot of the research and get to a point in which they understand what these shifts that customer success is really driving can do for them. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. And by the way, my brother, who's a television reporter, said, Bruce, you've got a face for podcasting.
Well, you never know. We may be doing video on here, so maybe makeup artist, maybe in your future. We'll see.
Good. I'll schedule an appointment with the plastic surgeon.
Hey, there we go. Well, many thanks. That is it for this episode of Next in Tech. Thanks to our audience for staying with us. And thanks to our production team, including Carolyn Wright, Katerina Iacoviello, Ethan Zimmon on the marketing and events teams, and our studio lead, Kyle Canulosi. I hope you'll join us for our next episode, where we will be discussing robots. Ian Hughes is going to be back to dig into a lot of things we'd started probably about 6 months ago, to talk about robot applications and a lot of what is a subject that I think gets misunderstood in terms of its real practical applications. But I hope you'll join us then, because there is always something next in tech.